सर्वावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। हरि ओम तत्सत। So today we are going to discuss Manusmriti. Manusmriti. Now before we get to this subject, let's revisit the very idea of spirituality and religion. In one of the first classes we had mentioned that spirituality means to know and to realize. Realize means actually realize the absoluteness of God. You can call it by any name. You can call God by any name that you prefer. For example, Buddhists call it Nirvana, Muslims call it Allah, or whatever name you can call it, but absoluteness. That means in every sense it is superior to the world. This is known as spiritual knowledge. The knowledge, understanding, and finally the realization of the absoluteness of God is spirituality. Now when that spirituality is applied to the society, it is known as religion of that society. That is, so when you apply spirituality to any particular religion, that means the spiritual truth that God is absolute, when applied to the society, Arabian society, the Arabic society, it becomes Islam. When you apply spirituality to the Indic society, the society that's in India, it becomes Hinduism. Then you apply it to certain society, it becomes religion of that kind of people. And we had mentioned very clearly that every religion has four aspects. It has its philosophy, it has its mythologies, that is sacred stories that talk about God and God relation. Then there are rituals, and lastly there are code of conduct. And we have been mentioning, those of you who have been following these talks from very beginning with very close attention, you will realize that we mentioned that in every religion these four are mixed. Quran, Bible, etc. They have a mixture of all these four things. Something similar happens in Hinduism too. In Hinduism, all these things are mixed in the Vedas. But because Hinduism or Hindu religion or Hindu Dharma, whatever name you call it by, it discusses religion in totality, and the entire race has given itself to the discovery and understanding of Hindu religion, So sages, that means people who dedicated themselves to the art and science of religion, they came up with different texts that dealt with the specialized topics of these aspects. And we had mentioned earlier that philosophy mostly comes from the Upanishads. The myths come from Ramayana, Mahabharata and the Purana. The rituals come partly from the Purana and partly from Tantras. And social conduct, that is personal conduct as well as social conduct, they come from class of literature known as Smritis, of which Manusmriti is the most famous. So So, Smritis deal with righteousness. That means goodness of conduct. About your personal conduct as well as your social conduct. How you should be carrying when with the society and when you are not in the society, when you are alone. So Smritis basically deal with that. In earlier times, when the British scholars started studying Hindu religion, they called Smritis as law books, and even today they are translated as law books of the Hindus. But this is not really correct. Calling the Smritis as law books is not really correct. First, let's see what are law books. As you all know that the tendency to live, it is inherent in every life form. Every life form wants to live. And this tendency to live is carried out through fight and flight or fright. That means whenever it faces some danger, it either tries to overcome that or it tries to run away. Overcome by fighting or run away. So, usually it is seen that the mighty, the powerful, what they do is, they say that live and let die. I will live, and anybody who comes in front of me, he has to die. That's the general tendency. In fact, if you look at your own life, that includes of course me, that we have a tendency that I must have the best. For example, when you are in a traffic jam, you feel that your car should somehow cross the red light and you should be moving faster. When you go for some kind of tickets, some kind of reservation, you want to jump the queue, you want to have it for yourself. This tendency that let me be, and it does not matter with me what happens to others. It is inherent in human form. But if everybody says that me first, the society will collapse. To make the society run, every society has framed different kinds of codes, different kinds of laws, so that space is created for every member of the society, not for a particular individual. Now, these codes usually come in two forms, either through some very powerful personality or as divine command. The most famous command or commandments that we know of it's from Hammurabi, considered to be the oldest law given by Hammurabi, in which he very famously said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Very famous. That this is the tribal justice form. If you hurt somebody, to mete out justice to that person, or so that that person may get justice, the same hurt or same harm will be caused to you. And you will be surprised to know that at times we may feel bad about it, that Hammurabi's law, it sounds so tribal. But you will be surprised to see how even in today's society and in the most advanced countries, the same principle continues. Like if somebody has been killed, we say that the person who killed, he should be hanged until death. So basically it is the same law governing. Life for life. So that kind of thing continues. Of course, in general now, such kind of punishments have been replaced by imprisonment. But the idea remains the same. The second, Hammurabi was there, and similarly we find Napoleon drew the constitution of France based on the same principles of his power. Napoleon was a very powerful person, and whatever he dictated became the constitution of France, which is practiced even today. Then there are the divine commandments, of which the most famous is the commandments by Moses. The religion of the Jews is mostly dictated by the commandments of Moses, and of that, lot of things came to Christianity too. More than that, entire of Islam, the whole of Islam is more or less dictated by the divine command of Allah, which has been recorded in the Quran. And some of the things which were not really, which do not come really from Quran directly, come in Sharia, which is the practice of Prophet Muhammad, etc. But the idea that every religion is to be governed by the divine command is predominant. So you find that in Christianity, you find that in Judaism, and you find that also in Islam. So basically we have two different kinds of laws coming. One is by powerful personality like Hammurabi, and say from persons like Napoleon or constitution makers. And then second is the divine command. Both the cases are known as laws. So the laws that are practiced, say in Islamic society, is from the divine command. And the laws that are practiced in Christian society are from the divine command. And again, the laws that are practiced in India is from the constitution, which comes from a powerful body who were the constitution makers. Now when we come to Smritis, which are translated as law books of the Hindus, and you will know that in recent times, particularly after independence, in recent times, Manusmriti has come under very severe attack, and so-called progressive members of progressive societies, they criticize Manu for lots of things. But we need to understand how Hindu society was shaped by these Smritis, particularly Manusmriti, and things should be seen in proper perspective. Now Smritis are not really law books, not at all the law books. Smritis are basically codes of conduct, and how these codes of conduct came is very interesting in the sense, those of you who have been following these classes with real focus, you will realize that the Vedas are the fountainhead of the Hindus, and Vedas dealt mostly with sacrifices, that is yajna, to get some divine favor. To perform these sacrifices, these yajna, there had to be rituals, and for that rituals there had to be certain code of conduct, like the priest has to be like this, priest has to be in this shape, and slowly from that there were so many codes of conduct that they were slowly brought down to some kind of a manual which was known as sutras. Sutras basically means thread, and it also means some very short statements. So the Brahmins who used to be involved with the sacrifices, they slowly noted down those sutras so that they could remember what things to do and what not to do. From there, these sutras were finally compiled and they came to be known as kalpa. In our talk on the Vedas, we had mentioned 6 Vedanga, and there was one kalpa, which was manual of the sacrifices. And these kalpa sutras dealt with do's and don'ts of certain class of people, and from there slowly ethical codes emerged. So the ethical code of the Hindus is pretty old. Now from those kalpa sutras, different smritis evolved, which discussed what should be the code of conduct of a householder and of a student, of a teacher, things like that. Of these smritis which evolved from these kalpas, there are 2 smritis which owe its very existence to the Vedas, but they were not directly influenced by the kalpa. They are independent work. One is known as Gautam's Sutra, and most importantly Manusmriti. Manusmriti does not come directly from the kalpa, but it is based entirely on the philosophy of the Vedas. Now when we talk about Manusmriti or the Smritis, and we are talking about the Vedas, one may feel that ultimately since these things are coming from the Vedas, then these become divine. No, they don't become divine, because the hymns and the mantras that come in the Vedas, they are treated as divine. But how to perform those rituals, they are not divine. They were codified by human beings. And the Smritis are by nature very dynamic. Because they realize that if a particular yajna or sacrifice is being performed in some part of the country, they may have some kind of difficulty. So improvise. So they improvised. So improvisation is a basic rule of the Smritis that has continued. So the entire Hindu society had so many Smritis that had come from the Kalpas, and Hindus were practicing lots of things. When you read Valmiki Ramayana, we find certain practices going on, and some of the stories of the Vedas also dictate how certain practices were there. And Mahabharata, assuming that Mahabharata is an older work compared to Manusmriti, we find how the kings behaved and how a person stationed in a particular station of life, at a particular state of life, how he was supposed to behave. So, these codes were pretty loose. What Manu did was, he codified those things. He just collected things and put them in proper perspective as also in proper order. Now, when we talk about law of Moses, when we talk of law of Moses, it basically means that God gave ideas to Moses or revealed to Moses certain commandments, and his people were, that is, people of Moses who followed Moses, had to follow those commandments. That is not the case with Manu, and that is not the case with any of these Smritis. This is a fundamental mistake that most of us make while reading Smritis or Manusmriti, and while understanding it. Under no condition, any Smriti, even if that be Manusmriti or any of the Smritis coming from the Kalpa, is binding to a Hindu. It is suggestive. Every Smriti is suggestive in nature. And in one of the talks we had mentioned that Smritis, they are not Prabhu Sangita. Prabhu Sangita means command of a master. These are known as Surit Sangita. Surit Sangita means suggestions by a friend. So, Smritis are by nature suggestive. They just suggest, you should be doing this. In fact, if you chance to read Manusmriti, you may even come across conflicting comments. Conflicting comments means at one place Manu says something, at other place he says exactly the opposite of that. For example, at one place he says that a Brahmin should not teach Vedas to unworthy disciples, even if that wisdom is lost. And after some chapters he says, if the wisdom is lost, it is lost forever. So it is better to teach it even to an unworthy disciple. You can see the contradiction. Basically that shows that Manu, being a chronicler, he just collected things. So some sages may have certain ideas, some other sages may have had an opposite idea. So he just collected them together, brought them on a platform and presented it before the public. The choice of practicing or not practicing lay entirely with the individual. And what Manu basically did was, he took the practice of the majority. What the majority was doing, he just took that and put it at one place. So blaming Manu for anything is absolutely wrong. It's just because people do not know. It's something like, those of you who are conversant with the system of dictionaries, you know that Oxford Dictionary, it keeps on imbibing certain words. It takes in some words. How? When it sees that people are using certain words, like just now I came across the term bindas. Bindas is a very casual word in Hindi, and it has been now taken up by Oxford Dictionary. In the sense of carefree attitude, it is being used so much by the English-speaking Indians, it has been absorbed by the Oxford Dictionary. So this happens. So what Manu did basically was, he just had a look at what the majority were practicing, what the sages had said, and what the Smritis in general, which were loose all over the society, He just took the best of them, collected them and placed before the society. Something similar had been done in grammar by Panini. In India there are two kinds of writers. First is those who create some kind of original work, and the second ones are who create Sanghita. Sanghita means collection of work. Manusmriti, another name of Manusmriti is Manu Sanghita. Collections by Manu. It's Sanghita. Manu is not at all to be blamed for this. Every time I hear criticism of Manu, I feel sad. Let's say how sad. People don't even know. He is not a lawgiver. He just collected things and placed before the public. Well, a majority is doing this. And now if you want to practice, practice. If you don't want to practice, don't practice. The way dictionary does it. Basically every time dictionary says this word means this, it only means that majority of the people are using this word in this sense. If you don't want to use it, fine. You become an author, you become a poet, you use it in a different sense, and then the meaning of the word will change. And that is why in India there is no fixed Smriti. Please remember it. There is no fixed Smriti in India. There are literally thousands and thousands of Smritis, and every local region practices its own Smriti, of which Manusmriti is the most famous. Then there is Yagyavalkya Smriti, there is Parashar Smriti, and there is one commentary on Manusmriti, Smitakshari. It has been adopted by the government of India, and lots of laws of succession, marriages, etc. is taken from Mitakshari. But basically that all these commentaries like Yagyavalkya and Parashar and all that, these Smritis, they basically draw heavily from Manusmriti. Because Manusmriti is highly inclusive. Highly inclusive. It doesn't leave out anyone. He takes in everyone. As we proceed, we shall see how he takes in everyone. And he tries to accommodate everybody and tries to find a place for everyone, as we shall see. The general notion that we have about Manu is completely wrong. So, it says that there are, if you look at these Smritis, there are 18 major Smritis, but thousands of lesser popular Smritis. In Bengal, where we are staying, Raghunandan Smriti is in vogue, and surprisingly Raghunandan Smriti was written sometime in 12th century, if I am not wrong, or I may be wrong. So, roughly for 1000 years, no new Smriti has been written in Bengal. And Manusmriti was written sometime, scholars say, 2nd or 3rd century BCE, before Christ. Imagine. And that is collection. That means the Smritis, the codes of conduct must have been practiced for thousands of years before that, because Manu is just a chronicler. He is not giver of some law. The way Moses was, the way Prophet Muhammad was, or the way these constitution makers in India was. Where? So, surprisingly we find lots of shlokas, that is verses, common in Mahabharata and also in Manusmriti. So it's very difficult to say which one was original. Was Manu original or was Mahabharata original? Very difficult to say, because Mahabharata also draws heavily from other sources. Surprisingly, Mahabharata keeps on mentioning Manu. That Manu has also said something like this. So probably Manu was earlier, and there is a possibility that the original Manusmriti was written much earlier, and later on maybe some sages added certain things to that. But the scholars in general believe that the Manusmriti as we get today was definitely compiled finally by 2nd century BC. But then scholars, you really can't rely totally on them, because some scholars will say something, other scholars will say something different. Now, the number of Smritis are so huge in India, and Swami Vivekananda said that Smritis became the bane of Indian society. Too many social laws. I mean, if you just look at all the Smritis, you will just go mad. And you would never know, because starting from how to get up in the morning, and everything they would say, how you are going to yawn, and what you have to say when you yawn, and how are you to behave when you put your feet down on the ground from the bed, and going to the toilet and brushing your teeth, how many times your teeth is to be brushed, and how many times your face must be sprinkled with water. For example, let me tell you one very interesting episode that I personally faced once. I was a small kid and moving in a village, and for some reason the elderly gentleman who was with me had to wash his hands, and then he found this, there was water in a hole, and he washed it here. I just asked, is this water clean? I mean, can it be used? Then he said that such and such scholar has said that Goshpada basically means when a cow walks, the feet mark of a cow and the depth that is caused by the cow is enough to purify a person, the water accumulated in that pit. So it's basically a very small hole. Now if water has accumulated there, it is enough to purify a person. That means you can clean yourself in that. You don't have to go to a pond, and that much of water is enough. So I was a very small kid at that time, hardly 6 or 7 years old, and I was very surprised even at that time that how come there are Sanskrit verses that talk about how much of water can be used. What must be the volume of water from which a person can draw to feel himself clean. Even that law is there. So, and through thousands of Smritis, it's so difficult to practice each one of them. So what people usually do is they practice some particular Smriti and continue with that. Now, if you try to bring them together, what are the principles behind these Smritis? You'll find these Smritis deal with usually with three things. First is conduct, personal conduct. Second is your behavior in the society. And the last one is penance. It is known as achar, vyavahar, prashchitta. Sanskrit terms are achar, vyavahar, prashchitta. So every smriti, when you look at those smritis, you will basically find it dictates how your personal conduct has to be. Number two, how your behavior has to be when you are interacting with others. And lastly, what are the penances, prashchitta, that you must perform if you have made some kind of mistake? So, for example, when we talk of vyavahar, behavior, you might be knowing, Indians know that elders must be respected. This comes from Manusmriti, that elders have to be respected. If you don't respect your elders, it means you are not a Hindu. Surprisingly, Manu also adds that for different castes, the level of respect has to go differently. For a Brahmin, it's learning. If a person is more learned, he gets more respect. And number two is the Kshatriyas, the valor. The person who has greater valor, he is to be respected more. In case of Vaishya, person with more wealth is to be respected more. And as far as Shudras are concerned, person who is grown up in age, only that is the criteria for respect. Now when you look at today's India, you find that people with more wealth is being respected. That basically shows that we are in a Vaishya age, that entire country has become Vaishya. Because people with more wealth are respected. People with learning are no more respected. Because the Brahmins, only in the caste Brahmins, people with higher amount of learning are to be respected. So this how we are to treat. Somebody comes and who is to be respected. So Smritis decide that. And if you do not know that person's caste, then there are conditions how you are to judge. Says that just look for his behavior, and if you find that that person's behavior is noble, respect him. That way it goes. Now, more than that, we find that there are 4 very clear rules for these Smritis. Particularly when we look at Manusmriti, they are very 4 absolutely clear, and you'll find it pretty strange. The conditions and the basic parameters that Manu follows, and in general the Smritis follows. The first one is, for every individual and for every society, spiritual evolution is the goal. We mentioned that these Smritis are not law books, they are not even code of conduct, but they are scriptures, they are Shastra. The very definition of Shastra is that it has to teach you the 4 aims of life. There is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Most importantly, a Shastra is supposed to teach you the way and means to attain liberation, that is Moksha. Manusmriti does exactly that. The only goal of Manusmriti is to teach a person attain liberation through good conduct. When we are studying, say, Upanishads are the science of liberation through philosophy, through learning, through self-realization. You know yourself. Once you know yourself, and once you know the correct, the real self of you, you will have self-realization and you will have liberation. When you go for Puran and Ramayana and Mahabharata, you focus on the myths, the sacred stories. You meditate on that. You try to emulate those things and you attain liberation. When you practice those rituals, the goal is, if you practice those rituals properly with complete commitment, you will attain liberation. Similarly, Manusmriti, etc. are meant for liberation. Through good conduct, you attain liberation. Now, the law books are basically to obey, divine commandments are basically meant for obeying the command of God. Now, tomorrow you can question that I don't believe that these commands have come from God. Obviously, and there are lots of conflicts, and you know that particularly the rationalists in the Western world, they have raised lots of questions against lots of beliefs in the Christian world. Now, when it comes to commandments given by the powerful, there also the same problem comes. Once that person is out of power, a person may not like to listen to him. Some new commands will come. But these are Shastras that say that if you follow these kind of conduct, you will attain liberation. Once the time changes, once the place changes, these codes will also change. But the basic goal of taking a person towards liberation, that will always remain the same. So, everything that we come across in Manusmriti is focused at taking a person towards spiritual evolution. Not only a person, the society too. Second very shocking thing that you will find, and unbelievable, is in Smritis, inequality is treated as a basic fact of life. Under no condition any Smriti, and under no condition Manusmriti, will treat equality as the law of life. It may come as shock to all of you. But these sages, they are very clear cut. They don't hide behind words. They don't go under those truisms. Everyone is equal before law. No. It's very clear that people are not equal. They are not born equal. They don't live equally, and they don't die equally. And hence, their behavior has to be different. That means, Manu and other lawgivers treat every individual as an entity. And a person has to be treated not like a flock of sheep, but as an individual entity. Individuality is more important in every Smriti of India. The collectivism, where you herd people like flock of sheep or like a herd of cows. No herding. Every individual is important and individual has to be treated individually. Third, very important thing which we will be coming again and again is privilege oblique respect accorded to a person is directly proportional to the sacrifice that he makes. You will get privileges and you will get respect from the society. It will depend entirely on what sacrifices you are making. More sacrifices you make, more respect you get. It's a very simple law. For example, to tell you something very interesting, nowadays you might be knowing that officials in different states and ministers, they move in their cars with a red beacon. That beacon is there and sirens would be blaring and these ministers would run, their cars would whiz past. Now Punjab government has got rid of this system, but in other states it's there. Manu is very clear there. It says that if the king is going in a chariot and there is a graduate student walking, the chariot has to stop. The moment the king notes that here is a scholar coming, graduate student, and the right of passage will be to the scholar, not to the king. Why? Because here is a scholar who has sacrificed everything for learning. So he gets the right of passage, not the king. It says, if the king is coming from behind in a chariot and is in a hurry and he finds one scholar walking down the road, he has to stop his chariot, walk past with due permission of that scholar, and then the chariot goes ahead and then he boards and moves. You cannot just cross like that. So it's a very clear law. Brahmins were respected in the society simply because they made maximum sacrifice. Kshatriyas got second importance because they were ready to lay down their life. Vaishyas were third in importance because they were ready to sacrifice their wealth to make wealth percolate in the society. Shudras were given minimum respect because they were not supposed to sacrifice anything. They could eat anything, they could live any kind of life they wanted. They had every kind of material pleasure that they could, that money could buy. So the privilege and respect for them was minimal. So this is a very clear principle in Manusmriti. And lastly, society is considered to be more important than the individual, excepting in matters of self-realization. There is a verse that says, in the interest of a family, an individual has to be sacrificed. That is, if an individual is making problems, get rid of him. And in the interest of a village, a family has to be sacrificed. In the interest of a district, a village has to be sacrificed. And in the interest of a state, a district has to be sacrificed. But in the interest of your self-realization, everything in this world is to be sacrificed. That means the idea is that one has to accept larger whole as a bigger truth. And self-realization, where you know yourself, is the ultimate truth and is the largest truth. Similarly, this is about behavior, and when it comes to personal conduct, purity was given a lot of stress. Purity was very important, and the only reason for purity was that the ultimate spiritual truth is God, who is everything in this world, is pure. So worldly impurity has to be given up. Every kind of impurity, lots of things that you will find that Hindus keep on washing themselves and taking bath, and taking bath is so important. All these things stem from that basic principle that spiritual purity is important, and to bring in spiritual purity, one has to have physical purity, verbal purity and mental purity. So purity finds tremendous importance in Hindu law books or code of conduct, whatever you may call. Now there are certain aspects of Smritis beyond these basic principles. One of them is that all these Smritis, particularly Manusmriti, accepts limitations of human beings and of a society not as fundamental. It says that a person has limitations, but it's not fundamental. And that's why the possibility of moving up is always there. And for example, it says, it limits the privileges of the Shudras, but it also says that if a Shudra takes up the good habits, the noble habits of a Brahmins in matters of cleanliness, purity, mental purity, he should always be encouraged. It's not saying that if a person is there, let him lie like that. No, it's not that. And similarly, at other place it says that although Brahmins will study the Vedas and will go to heaven, if the Shudras continue to be true to their duties, by the virtue of that itself, they will attain the same, absolutely the same heaven as of the Brahmins. Here we need to mention one very important thing, that the caste system, about which we will be discussing in a moment, it is not something divine, not in India. The divisions, it's not divine, it's a social system. And that's why we find that these Smritis, when they talk of heaven, they don't say that Brahmins will have a different heaven and the Shudras will have a different heaven. They say that in this society, this inequality is there and it is a fact of life. But that does not mean that one cannot overcome this inequality. One can overcome this inequality through various means about which we will be discussing. Smritis accept law of karma as something very important. And it's something like whatever you do, you get the results, as we discussed in Mahabharata. Unfortunately, this law of karma, particularly in Smritis, became its bane. It became its curse. Because it was extended beyond a point. For example, supposing somebody was poor, instead of merely telling that you are poor because maybe you did something wrong in the previous life, now set things right for yourself, it started condemning the poor, telling that you had done something, you deserve it, and now you be there. That became a social practice, not the Smritis. But the society treated things badly. Similarly, when it came to lower caste, the same problem came. It was interpreted as if he had done that person had done something wrong in the previous birth. That's why he has been born in a lower caste. Now that was to be bane, and that's how Manusmriti is condemned today, mostly because of that. But actually, Manusmriti is not to be blamed. The interpretation of these sacred books by the society was completely wrong. Very surprisingly, Manusmriti talks about two kinds of dharma, lower and the higher. Doing something is good and not doing is better. There's something very strange, because you don't find this kind of two kinds of dharma, that is, doing something is good and not doing the same thing is better. This is very typical, absolutely typical of the Hindus. For example, it says, Satyam Buryat, Priyam Buryat, Na Buryat Satyam Apriyam. Speak the truth. Speak pleasant. But don't speak unpleasant truth. That means it is good to be truthful. And it is better not to be truthful when it hurts somebody. That means, you might often come across people who say, I am so straightforward. Manu never permits straightforwardness. Says that it's a sign of lack of culture. If you are straightforward to the extent of being unpleasant, it only means that you are uncultured. You have not been trained properly. Similarly, it says, preaching of dharma is better, and not preaching dharma is better if it harms somebody, if it injures somebody. This is something interesting. We people, we are teaching Vedanta to anyone and everyone who comes across. And people, Swamiji at one place says that people come and ask for bread and we give them stone. Teaching religion to a hungry is insulting him. Manu is very clear about it. Teaching dharma is noble, but not teaching dharma to people if it harms is better. So when you find that people who are trying to convert into this religion, that religion, Manu will never permit it. It injures, it harms. And that's why Hindu never proselytized. Hindus never convert others to Hinduism, simply because it may not be good for him. How do I know that it is good? Of course, in recent times, we hear that there have been some conversions here and there. On the other hand, for example, it says, na mans bhakshane dosho na madhye na cha maithune. You know, people love eating non-vegetarian food. People love drinking and people love chasing women. Manu says, it's perfectly normal, it's perfectly okay if people do all this. But it is better if you don't do this. So Manu is very liberal in these things. He says that these are natural tendencies. You can't stop people from doing all this. It's okay if you do this, but it's better if you don't do. And I'm just quoting one or two of these. But there are many other such quotes where it says that it's good to do this, but it is better not to do this. Similarly, we had mentioned in Mahabharata how it was said that it's good to speak the truth, but under certain conditions you must not speak truth, particularly if it harms somebody disastrously. If somebody's life is in danger, if your own life is in danger, if somebody is about to lose everything that he has, or if you are about to lose everything that you have, under these conditions you should not speak the truth. Speaking truth is a sin under these conditions. This is how Manu treats the law. He is very pragmatic, very practical. To him life is very important, and to him purpose of life is very important. Somewhere that balance has to be found, and it's not that easy to find that balance. Even then Manu tries to find that balance. Now before we proceed further, we need to understand something about the caste and communities, etc. that has become bane of the Hindu society, and whenever Hinduism is discussed, people always associate Hinduism with castes. So we need to understand. When we look at Valmiki Ramayana or even the Vedic traditions, because even the scholars say that the Vedas are the oldest, and next in antiquity is Valmiki Ramayana, we find mention of Jati. Jati basically means in which you are born, and Jati is associated with trade guild. People do certain kind of work, and the kind of work they performed was known as Jati. So the person who was working as a, say, ironsmith, he was known as Lohakar, basically blacksmith, carpenter, barber. So these are all Jati. And people in general wanted that their own children should be trained in that particular art from the very childhood, so that when he grows he doesn't face any difficulty. Secondly, business interests were to be guarded, to be preserved. Like, you know how people who are very successful in life, they want that their children should not suffer. They make arrangements in such a way that even at a young age those people enter the company and take the board, etc. Something like that was there with these guilds. So Brahmins wanted that their children should have the knowledge of their trade, and similarly carpenter also wanted that they should have their children should have that thing, the knowledge of carpentry. And slowly these things crystallized. But they all lived in peace because everybody needed everybody else. We don't know exactly when the concept of Varna came. Varna basically, these scholars have defined it in various ways, but we find in Valmiki Ramayana itself, and of course by Mahabharata, it becomes very clear that all the jatis, the different trade guilds, that is, which is popularly known as caste, they were classified into 4 major groups. Today the caste system is under massive attack, but nobody realizes it, that how persons like Manu, who came up with this Varna system, made the whole system very inclusive. At the lowest end there is an individual. At slightly higher level you have the family, where you sacrifice things for your family and your family members protect you. And when you go slightly higher up, you have the tribal mentality, where there is that village mentality. And when you go slightly higher up, it is Jati. So a person who lived, say, in Bengal and goes to, say, Rameshwaram, and there he just looks for people of his own Jati, and he finds accommodation and everybody takes care of him. There was no problem in that. So we find that how slowly things are becoming narrowed in the sense of the group becoming larger and larger group and larger group. And finally when 4 Varnas came, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Sudra, all these jatis were accommodated in one of these 4. Surprisingly, these four Varnas were not fixed. In one of the, Swamiji at one place says, Swami Vivekananda mentions how persons like Shankaracharya would take up one of these jatis or one of these tribes and assign them to one of the higher Varna. They were never given the lower Varna. They were always given the higher Varna. So this was the origin of the 4 Varna that continued and continues. And we find that sometimes in moments of anger somebody says, don't forget that I am a Brahmin, although you may not have any Brahminical qualities. Beyond these 4, when we had this Varna system, there were the privileges and duties. Duties were entirely defined by the sacrifices that they made. So a Brahmin boy was supposed to study with a teacher for flat 32 years, giving up his family and everything. So assuming that a boy went to study with his guru at the age of 8, he would complete his study only when he was 40 and he could marry only after that. So imagine the sacrifice he had to make. And even then, once he got married, it was difficult for them to have babies because of various reasons. So because these sacrifices were made, and Manu is very clear that if a Brahmin maintains property or accepts wealth in lieu of teaching the Vedas, he is to be treated as a Shudra. And if a Shudra has behavior of the Brahmin, he is to be accorded the respect of the Brahmin. So based on this, the Hindu society worked. And with the Varna system was ashram system, in which there were the students, they were known as Brahmacharya, and after Brahmacharya they used to get married, and they were known as Grihastha. And it was expected that once a person saw the face of his grandson, he would leave his house and become Vanaprasthi. That means he would go outside the society and live a very simple life. And finally, when he felt that he doesn't want anything, he would become a monk, he would become a sannyasi. So there were these 4 things, 4 Varnas and 4 ashramas. So these 16 things defined Varnashram Dharma. Today we won't have much time, and we will be discussing duties and privileges, etc., maybe in some later class. So ultimately, we find that all these Varnas and all these ashramas, they got their respect and privileges based entirely on the sacrifices that they made. Beyond these 4 Varnas, there was one 5th Chandal, who were considered to be untouchables. And there are many theories how this Chandal originated. Let's not get into the details of that. But the Chandalas, they had a very pathetic life, and they were devoid of any kind of privilege. They were very unclean, etc. And sometimes they would be cursed. And in later times, the Chandal and Shudra somehow got mixed up, which is not the correct thing. And ultimately, this was to prove as the curse to the Indian society. Swami Vivekananda repeatedly said that give back the individuality to the masses, because the mass of the Indian population belonged to Shudra and Chandal, and they themselves were devoid of any privilege. Because as the time passed, what the Brahmins and Kshatriyas did, they were not true to their own trade. They were not making proper sacrifices, but they held on to the privileges. And as happens with most individuals, those self-centered, selfish people, they want to hold on to their privileges without making the right sacrifices. So that ultimately caused disaster in India. But fortunately, after independence, partly because of the Muslim rule and partly because of the British rule, the systems were broken down. Things had crystallized so badly, there was no way that these things could be broken down. But because of the foreign rule, those things got broken down. And finally, when Indian Constitution came, these people got back their individuality. Today they have the right to vote, and they are treated as equal. And the reservation system takes care of the privileges that they had lost in the past. Now, I'm not talking in favor of this or in favor of that. The basic thing is that for whatever reason, the masses that had been left out, not by Manu, but by the society, they have been brought back in the mainstream. So from here we move over to Manusmriti, the main Smriti, which has really shaped the later Smritis. As we discussed, Manusmriti came sometime in 2nd BC, and by nature it's highly inclusive, as we shall see. Manusmriti begins with creation, the popular idea of creation. We will have one full talk on how Indians treat creation, how the Hindus treat creation. And Manu believes that one has to go back to that state, and while living in this world has to keep oneself pure. And this purity can come only through Dharma. So Manusmriti discusses Dharma. Dharma basically is Achar, Vyavahar and Prayashchitta, self-conduct, behavior and the penances. So while discussing this Dharma, Manu describes the Dharma of each and every kind of person, the student, the householder, the king, mother, father, teacher, all kinds of duties he discusses. But of course, there can never be an end to all this. And then he moves over to personal habits, sanitations, etc. And Dharma is so important to Manu. He says that one is born alone, one dies alone, one travels to the next world alone. Father, mother, sister, wife, no one will be there in the other world with you. It's only Dharma that will be with you. So focus on Dharma instead of focusing on anything else. And Manu sums up his idea of Dharma as, of all the Dharma, knowledge of self, as in the Upanishads, is the highest, and everyone should strive to attain the knowledge of self. Now, overall we find that when we look at Manu's work, as far as the individual is concerned and the society is concerned, he gives tremendous amount of privileges to the cultured and the educated, and he also demands maximum sacrifice from them. As we said, one of the basic cardinal principles in these Smritis is inequality of life. But in inequality of life, sacrifice is very important. Higher you are up in the society, more sacrifices you have to accept. And Manu also accepts that there would be different class of people in different places, and the culture of any people is very important for Manu. And so he says that a conquering king, if a king conquers some land, some state, that king should make sure that the culture of that place is preserved. He should consolidate his power, but the local culture has to be preserved at any cost. Just imagine how inclusive Manu is. Now, how cultured a society is can be seen by how it treats its minorities or the underprivileged. Not the minorities, underprivileged. Popularly, in our popular parlance, there are two underprivileged things, or particularly for the last 2000 years. One is Shudras, another is women. Now, when it came to Shudras, where we mentioned that certain jatis were assigned the Shudra caste, and they were given certain kind of licenses regarding food habits, marriages, divorces, etc. In lieu of that, they got less and less respect. But when it came to the spiritual enlightenment and life after death, they were treated with equality. As we just mentioned, it was said that the person, a Brahmin, goes to the heaven by studying the Vedas, practicing the Vedas, and a Shudra will go to the same heaven just by practicing his Swadharma. So he is not telling that Shudras are inferior as far as spiritual truth is concerned. Inequality lies in the society. Inequality does not lie in spirituality. For example, if you look at Islam, you will find that Muslims will go to the heaven and everybody else will go to the hell. So you find unequal heavens for different kind of people. Not Manu. For Manu, everyone will go to the same heaven if one sticks to his dharma. Now when it comes to, we will see one very interesting thing about Shudra a little later. When it comes to women, Manu is aggressively inclusive and liberal. It's unbelievable. Generally, once I met somebody and I was talking about Manu, and the lady said, Manu, he should be banned. He's so anti-woman. I asked the lady, have you read Manusmriti? Have you read his views on Manu? He's 2,500 years old. And I just brought some shloka, some verses from Manu. First of them, which is popular in Mahabharata also, says, Patir bharyam sampravishya garvo bhutveva jayate. The husband enters the womb of his wife and comes out as a child. And that's why she is known as Jaya. So basically it is the husband who is born from the wife, and hence the wife, that is female, has to be given utmost respect simply because he himself is born. She is not the mother of that person's child. She is the mother of her husband itself. And that's why he comes to Yatra Naryastu Pujyante Ramante Tatra Devata. The house where the females are treated with utmost respect, gods themselves reside there. And it says that if the women are not respected in a house, that house is soon ruined. If India is going to doldrums today, it's simply because we are not respecting our women the way they should be respected. It's so strong. Imagine, in India, Atithi, the guests, are given the stature of gods. Guests are God. Even today, Atithi Devo Bhava we say. Manu lays down very clear rules. Suvasini Kumarischa Rogino Garvina Striya. The girls who are not yet married and newly married daughter-in-law, and some female who is not well, and one who is pregnant, they are to be given food first, even before the guests. The first food has to go not to the guests, but to 4 females: unmarried girls, newly wed daughter-in-law, the sick female, and the pregnant, even before the guests are given food. And he very clearly says that women are to be treated with care and caution. Of course, he doesn't allow licenses to females too. And he says that females need to be guarded well. And then he adds, no female can be guarded by any means till they guard themselves. Atmanam atmana yastu rakshayustu surakshita. When female protect themselves, only then they get protected. No one else can protect them. It's not possible. And says that the entire training has to be such that females protect themselves. And he's so clear about the privileges of female. Says, damned is the father who doesn't look after his daughter properly and doesn't give his daughter in marriage at proper time. In fact, he says, if the daughter is of marriageable age and she is not given away in marriage by father, she is free to choose husband of her own liking. And damned is the husband who doesn't look after, who doesn't satisfy his wife in every possible way. And damned is the son who doesn't look after his mother. Reprehensible is the word. And he says that women must be educated. He lays special stress on the education of females. And then he comes up with the concept of Stridhan, which some of you might be knowing. Stridhan means the property of a female. Any money that is offered, that is in form of dowry, at the time of marriage, the ornaments, and any gift that is given to that lady by her father, her brother, or any from that parent's house becomes Stridhan. It is her personal property. If she dies, that property doesn't go to her husband, it doesn't go. It goes to her son. And if there is no son, it goes to her grandson. Grandson means her daughter's son. Daughter doesn't get, but daughter's son gets. Her in-laws will never get it under no condition. It condemns. If anyone takes away this wealth, he is condemned. And surprisingly, says, if the rights of a woman, that is property rights, are not preserved by the household, he be condemned. His conduct is to be condemned. And then he says, the king of the land has to make sure that the property of the female, that is Stridhan, her own property, is not compromised under any condition. And lastly he says, God's curse will be on the family who touches the Stridhan, female's will. See, when Swami Vivekananda was in the West, people were criticizing Swamiji that you Indians, you treat your women so badly. Swamiji never replied. But then one of his friends, he took up this Manusmriti and just took these verses and wrote that no country in the world, no society in the world has given the privileges and protection to females the way Manu has given. That means, he says, everyone has to make sure that the daughter is well educated. In house, she is to be treated as priority. She is to be well protected by everybody, and she has to have her own personal wealth, which cannot be touched even if she dies by her in-laws. It can go only to her son or to her grandson. So, similarly we find, you will be surprised to know that Manu lays down very clear laws of marriages and remarriages and widow marriages. See, normally we know that Hindu widows do not marry. But if you look at the verses, you can clearly see that widow marriage is fully permitted. Remarriage, punarbhu, there is a term punarbhu. Punarbhu basically means second marriage. We don't know, how the society changes is a phenomenal thing. When you read the original Manusmriti, you feel surprised, my God, things like that. And surprisingly, when it comes to justice, both Shudras and Stri, the females, it says, Stridam Sakshyam Strihi Kuryad Vijanam Sadrisha Dvija. See, when justice is being meted out, when there is a jury, justice is being meted out, the witness for a female has to be only females. And the witness for the Shudras have to be only Shudras. And witness for the lower castes have to be only lower castes. That means you cannot have witnesses from the male who will say that no, she did something. Witness has to be female. Imagine the idea of justice that Manu had for the underprivileged. And you will be surprised that even today's Indian penal system is not as broad as Manu was. Now when it comes to values, Manu talks about, in fact, entire Manusmriti is about values. He talks about three kinds of compromises, mistakes one commits: physical, mental, and verbal. And he says that the penances must be carried out, must be practiced to purify oneself. And how? He says, if you make some kind of mistake physically, penance has to be physically. If you make it verbally, it has to be verbally. And if you make it mentally, it has to be mentally. So, and then he gives the list. He says, if you covet the property of others, think of lustful things, and you do not believe in the Vedas, then these are mental sins. Like even if you mentally think that you should have his wealth, it's a mental sin. And then abusing others, telling lies, ridiculing others, and idle talks, gossiping. These are four kinds of verbal wrongdoing. And taking away what is not rightfully yours, injuring others, and cohabiting with others' wife. These are the things that Manu, of these three are considered the most objectionable. Taking away others' property, injuring others, and cohabiting with others' wife. And says that good karma is caused by abstaining from these three kinds of faults. And in general we find that contentment, truth, and non-violence, these things find high priority. But truth for truth's sake, it's absolutely encouraged. That you just want to be truthful, no. You can be true only if it's pleasant, if it does good to others. If not, just stay silent. If your truth causes harm to others, you better tell a lie. Manu is very clear about it. Now, when it comes to idea of justice, because in earlier times, we did not have two different things, the idea of dharma and idea of law. Today we have Indian constitution and we also have Indian penal code. In earlier times, these Smritis, they combined both of these. Now, when it came to idea of justice, there also Manu's law of inequality prevails. It says that everyone is not equal before justice. Depending on the mental maturity and mental purity, the justice meted out to a person, the punishment meted out to a person will be different. And of course, these things have come under very severe criticism in modern times. But let's not forget that justice for all and equal justice for all, it is a mere truism. These are just hollow words, big words. Because we very well know that in India, at least today, person who suffers, person who has been offended against, these persons have to run from pillar to post. And people who are high and mighty, they always manage to get away by doing anything they want. Where is your equal justice? Etc. Anyway, let's not get into all those controversies. But Manu was very practical. And there he says that mistakes are of two kinds. One is by mistake, that is unmeditated, by chance, and another is premeditated. You thought over it and you have deliberately done this mischief. Says that if you do it unknowingly, then there are penances, of which recitation of your Ishta mantra, something like Gayatri mantra, or reading out the Vedas, it is enough. And of course, in certain cases, there are some other kinds of penances that it prescribes. But if you deliberately did it, it required harsher treatment, in which punishment was given. But punishment was essentially a kind of penance only. Punishment was meant to bring you back through harsher means. Let's not forget that the goal of Manusmriti is spiritual evolution of a person. Spiritual evolution of an individual and of the society is the goal of Manu. So the idea of justice, the way we understand, this person has killed and hence he should also be killed. No, it does not find favor in Manu. The idea is that there has to be spiritual evolution. So he goes to the extent of telling that if a person accepts his punishment in proper light as an idea of penance, that okay, I committed some mistake, I am being punished for my own well-being, because otherwise I will accumulate bad karma. That would be worse. Then only it is good for that person. And as far as society is concerned, he very clearly says that first, the judge should first admonish the person that you should not be doing this. If he does it again, then reproof has to be harsher. And then at third stage, fine. Some kind of monetary punishment. And lastly, corporal chastisement. It's not like that somebody has made a mistake or done something and immediately pushed him to jail, and it does not matter what that person is. So if Einstein makes a mistake, he also goes to the jail, and there is this pickpocket, he also goes to the jail. No, Manu does not accept that. So, because you will find that in today's social justice, there is more of vengeance. And you say that justice system is as a deterrent. For Manu, it was neither deterrent and nor some kind of vengeance. It was evolution of a person. And the entire thing was based on that principle, and the idea of punishment was worked out accordingly. So, essentially Manu's approach, as far whatever little we saw, was highly compassionate, highly inclusive. There are two things we could not discuss today. One is the idea of Panchamaha and sanskar. Like when a person is born, when a baby is born, it is assumed that since he has come to the world, he is impure. There is some kind of impurity in him, why else he would be born. Because according to Hindu spiritual philosophy, the person who is pure, who is established in his spiritual nature, will not be entangled with the world. Only self-realization can free that person from that impurity. But not every person is meant for self-realization. So a person has to go through various sacraments, various stages of purification. And during the Vedic period, there were 64 sanskara. During Manu's time, it came down to 16. And by the time Tantra came, there are now only 10 sanskara, in which you have ideas like when a baby is born, certain rituals are performed, and then there is Annaprashan, then there is Namkaran, he is named, and then Upanayan, when he puts on the sacred thread, marriage, and the last one is the Antyeshti, which is consigning the body in the funeral pyre. It's consigned. So that's the ultimate purity. And sometimes these things are also known as some kind of yajna, where you are offering yourself into that kind of thing. And there is 5 great sacrifices that every person is expected to perform daily. That we shall discuss in the rituals of the Hindus. So, one very important thing that all of us need to know, that Smritis are dynamic in nature. They are not divine commandment, and they are not also forced down the throat. Being suggestive, and Manu accepts that with time and locality, these laws have to change. And that's why we have so many Smritis. And Swami Vivekananda also said the time for new Smriti has come. It's unfortunate that it's more than 100 years that Swamiji passed away and no new Smriti has been written. And Constitution of India, although sometimes it says that it's the new Smriti, but it's not Smriti Shastra. Because if you follow Constitution of India, it gives you the way of life. But it cannot lead you to Mukti. It's not meant to take you to liberation. So it's not a Shastra. What Swamiji wanted is a Smriti Shastra. What Manu wanted was a new Smriti Shastra. As we find that Manu was exclusive for his period, because let's not forget that Manu was 2500 years ago, and you cannot judge him from today's standards. So today we have to have a new Smriti. So we don't know what shape that Smriti will take, but that Smriti will have to be based on the principles of the Vedas and of Manu, that is inclusiveness, and take in the needs of the present day society and take care of everyone. So with this we complete the third important aspect of any religion, code of conduct. Thank you.